of you out there. You guys have been very quiet today, so if you have any questions, put your questions in the chat box, and we'll make sure our speakers answer your questions. So everyone, let's welcome our panel.
Thank you so much for staying and enjoying the pizza. It looks like they're putting more pizza out. So if you want any more before we begin, quickly run over and grab some. So my name is Dara Gibson, and I'm the president and CEO of InfraGard Arizona Members Alliance. And we are a nonprofit organization, and we partner with the FBI to better serve and communicate with the public and private sector organizations. At this time, I'd like to introduce the rest of our panel, but I always do things a little bit different, panelists, in which you must also share not only your name and your title and who you are, but something outside of cyber that you enjoy. So something outside of cyber that I enjoy is my purse collection. I have quite the collection of unique purses.
Testing.
Flipped on the switch. There you go.
Testing.
Yep.
Can you hear me? All right. My name is John Parsons. I'm the Chief Technology and Operations Officer at a local bank here called Integro Bank. One of the things I enjoy doing outside of cyber is I like getting into the great outdoors, doing hiking and adventuring with my family, and enjoying nature.
My name is Steve Murray. I am the Business Information Security Officer for GXO Logistics, and I'm a pilot, gunsmith, you name it, gun guy, pilot. Mainly flying around here because it's good flying weather.
Well, good guy to know, I think. James Baird, the Chief Information Security Officer for a small company called GoTo Foods. We're the parent company to Cinnabon, Schlotsky's, Moe's Southwest Grill, Auntie Anne's Pretzels, Carvel Ice Cream, Jamba Juice, and McAllister's Deli. So fun thing, I guess, interesting thing, for about 5 years in Georgia, I moved here about 5 months ago, but prior to that I was in Georgia for about 20 years. And for 5 of those years I was into and performed competition barbecue. And went to a lot of different, had a trailer rig in the whole 9 yards, so I'm a big foodie.
Hi, my name is Cunningham. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for ScriptPro. We're a software and robotics company for pharmacies. James, please protect the Cinnabons. The most important job in the room. Yeah. Outside of security, I think I spend most of my time with my whippets. We have 2 whippets that like to run around, so kids are out of the house, so it's all the attention on the dogs.
I'll be there August 20th, so the countdown is on at my house. James, also, you might want to share with everybody what you just purchased yesterday in regards to your love of barbecuing.
Okay, sure. If you've heard of a Santa Maria Grill, Arizona Barbecue Outfitters, a company here in, I guess they're in Tucson, they have a fairly large selection of different types of custom grills, and I bought a very, very nice one with it has a little side bracero, so if you're into Argentinian style cooking, that's what that's all about. So it's very, very good, very heavy, hard to get in my backyard, but it was really cool.
Okay, so the 4th of July barbecue apparently is at James's house. Anywho, for the real reason why we're here, thank you, gentlemen, for sharing about who you are. But we are here to Securing the Future, CISOs, Insights, and industry leaders discussing current cyber threats and the strategic defense practices. So I have about 1 million questions that we're going to pursue. We want to make sure that we are here through probably 10 o'clock tonight, just to make sure we answer all of these diligently with thorough questions. No, just kidding. But we'll begin with the first question. Says, as the cyber threat landscape continues to evolve rapidly, how are CISOs like yourselves recalibrating your risk models and security strategies to keep up? Whoever wants to take on risk first. That's actually my favorite topic, so let's talk about risk.
All right, I'll go first. I think everybody is probably inundated with the AI piece of this. And when you start talking about threat, you have to start thinking about what's the latest and greatest, right? And I think every company is struggling with how do we use AI. So you have multifaceted threats that are popping up related to AI. One is data spillage, because everybody wants to throw everything into AI and have it spit out this magic answer. Then there's the piece of AI being used against you in a variety of formats. And then the third piece of it is guardrails around AI so that employees don't take things out or bring things in that are malicious. And we just literally, this is one of the topics that I've been focused on for probably the past year. And one of the biggest things that we're seeing, and I'll use an example, I was at a CISO forum about 8 months ago, and a CISO from one of the hospitals up in the Northwest that had been ransomed, we were sitting there playing with ChatGPT on a break, and I said, go out, scrape the colors from this website, build a web page to do phishing, to grab their social security number, their address, their phone number, et cetera, and then go scrape the GAL, the global address list, and set up this web page so you can send out an email and drive all this traffic. 3 minutes. 3 minutes is all it took. Those attacks 2 years ago, 3 years ago, used to take months to do. You'd have to build a web page, test the web page, build the email, send the email, scrape the GAL, make sure it was going to land on the other side. So the threat has not only changed in complexity, it's changed in speed and changed in velocity. And one of the things that most executive teams really don't understand is that the threat landscape is getting faster, not slower. And the weakest link may not be people, as a lot of us think. It could be a system, it could be a setting on a server. So it's one piece of it.
I guess from my perspective, with respect to the question about recalibrating the risk model, I think AI is such a shiny object for business leaders that the risk model has to take into account incorporating their expectations, their thoughts on what they want to do with AI, so you make sure that the governance is appropriately including your business partners. And I think that it can't be just a vacuum space that the cybersecurity team, the information security team is just doing the risk assessments without actually engaging the business units, because it is something that everybody just wants to latch onto. And I think that you have to widen the net in terms of how you're assessing the risk space, because it has to touch all of these different footprints across the business. It isn't just a cyber thing, it's a whole business thing. And it has to have the appropriate governance, it has to have the appropriate requirements review. And I think that it additionally needs to a certain extent, educate people that are more on the lay business side that don't really understand really what that really means from a security perspective.
Way better. Way better.
Excuse me. I do like the call out to the business. That's important. A couple of things that I discovered. Just there was a survey released today, recently anyway. Very, very, very new survey. Said that the people who use ChatGPT in 2025 are female and for doing personal things. So ChatGPT is one, obviously, just one of the AIs out there. But it's not being used primarily for nefarious things as far as the ChatGPT folks know. Inside an organization, the most popular AI is Grammarly. So it's such a challenge to explain to the executives that AI is a risk when they are seeing tremendous amounts of benefits from Grammarly and Adobe Acrobat and all of these things that make their lives and their marketing people's lives that much simpler and easier and cost effective. And so they'll see the dollar signs, and you're going to say, I need to have all this technology in place that's going to prevent people from misusing data, the data exfiltration traps and all this kind of stuff. And then they're going to say, well, I'm making $100,000 more a year because of it. And so for us as CISOs and for security practitioners, our challenge is really to reframe that risk, right? It is a challenge to the risk model. We have to reframe, and this is not unique to AI, right? Every security thing that's out there that we have, every, what we call it, a glittering object, right? Every squirrel that comes up, we always have to repeat the same exercise, and this is a huge challenge for us. Whoever said AI first, I made the motion because you have to have a shot glass every time somebody says AI.
So when we started off last year exactly trying to recalibrate. One of the things that I've done, or I've tried to do, is I work backwards. So working with our insurance vendor, they had a really good risk model that we could input data into, and it would spit out, what's your calculated loss from various scenarios. One of the things we really struggled with was the inputs for that. And so refining the inputs that you put into your risk model, I think will give you a better view of what the risk really is. And then from there, once we identified the risk and how we can quantify it, we tried to back into the scenarios where risk occurs or the tools that introduce risk like AI. So starting from the back and showing the expected loss and then backing into the different things that can cause that risk. So whether it's AI or IAM, whatever the case may be, but quantifying that risk, I think, is really important. And to do that, you have to have really good inputs. So we've focused a lot on the inputs to our model.
Not only the inputs, but understanding what your peers are utilizing for that risk modeling as well, and understanding what the peers within your industry or your sector are truly quantifying as those risks that are concerning the industry as a whole, and then narrowing it down to your own organization. So let's go now to, we talked about the importance of understanding our risk modeling and how we're utilizing it and the AI components that are being placed into it, but how are we now addressing these with our boards? In years past, you would have these board meetings and you'd be like, we quantified this much risk on this percentage and we saved this many phishing emails. How are you having that conversation now?
Addressing things with the board, I think, is an art more than it is a science. They want things fast, they want things brief, and they want things easy to discern. And you have an opportunity to color the narrative. Pictures and colors are what I use. Here's a picture, and is it red, yellow, or green? They don't pay attention to anything green. They think yellow's a nice color, but what about the red stuff? What do I need to pay attention to? And I think when you're dealing with your audiences, you have to know your audience. And with a board, my perspective is you have to go for quick wins to be able to tell them in a very brief amount of time what's really important and why. And I think pictures and colors do that. And the red stuff is where you give them a snapshot, but you're prepared to answer the questions, because if you can elicit the right questions from them by painting the right picture, then you get a chance to really spell out your narrative.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, I've told my management team, when you communicate up, less is more, right? So you're trying to, like you said, elicit the question that you can provide an answer to that will paint the picture for them, right? You want to lead them to water and not just go in there with a bunch of hand waving and, you know, call out all these different risks, right? And it kind of goes back to the quantification of it, right? I personally have to be able to show I have to be able to quantify that risk, or to them it's just hand waving.
Yeah, I think it really is an art form. There's a couple of ways you can do it. Usually, especially if you're if I was going to go in and tell the board something they didn't want to hear, I would always make sure that, number one, all my peers knew, and then I always had somebody on the board that I spoke to on a monthly basis, and I do that now where I talk to 2 board members on basically a monthly basis on, here's the current risk. Here's the things that are going to get us sued. Here's the things that are going to kill us. These are the things that we need to pay attention to. And he's right. It's an art form. Color matters. Language matters. You got to be concise when you go in. You know, I'd walk in the door. They say 10 minutes. I expect 5. They're going to be looking at their watches in 2 and their phones at 3. So I have to be succinct in what I say. And usually I hit them with the things, which is exactly what you said, that I can back up with fact very quickly. And you don't leave them hanging. You give them complete answers, and you let them make the decision on which risk they're willing to, A, accept, and B, the ones they want to mitigate. They're going to tell you right away. And one thing that you realize after doing it, you know, for several years, sometimes you'll get an answer from the board you didn't expect. So you should have 2 or 3 different variables that you want them to consider, especially when it's something that you drill down on it. And they'll do that from time to time. Every so often you'll get a board member that has deep technical background, and they'll take you to task on whether you're telling the truth or not. And usually that helps you win over the board members if you go in there and you have everything detailed out to where you can answer the questions in detail. But brevity is really important.
Yeah, I think we're all talking about the same thing. It's the art of storytelling. And there are professionals out there that hold classes on how do you tell a good story. And if you're interested in moving up and becoming a CISO or CIO or a CTO, God, hope not. But if you're trying to move up, the art of storytelling is something you should probably understand. Now, I've been a CISO across 5 different companies, and every board was different. American Cancer Society board, I had 8 pages of charts and diagrams with different sized icons to represent if a risk is growing or if it's shrinking, across a horizontal line to represent it. It was horrible. And the current company I'm at, everything is dealt with in burritos. We just sell burritos. And so whenever I have to translate risk to the board, I have to put it in their language. That's where the art of storytelling comes in, is you have to make them understand this is the number of burritos that we won't have if we end up getting ransomed or something like that, just as an example. So it's all about context. My board happens to be, the majority of them come from what's called the QSR space. It's quick serve restaurants. And then 2 of them are technologists. They actually understand technology. They're hardly ever at these board meetings, but there are 2 board members like that. I have to target them differently than I do the business people. Mm-hmm. And so it's all about, you know, we've all 4 of us up here have talked about. It's how you present the information. It's the art of storytelling. It's putting the information in the context that people who are listening to you will understand. That's not any different than if you're having a conversation with your child or if you're having a conversation with your parent. I can't tell you how often I've had to explain how to use a cell phone to my mother. And so if you contextualize it and put it in plain language, you put it in the language they understand.
And now I raise a toast to our next category, AI. AI is transforming both defense and attack. How are you integrating AI responsibly into your cybersecurity programs without introducing new risks?
I'll start on this one. You know, there are a lot of AI solutions, and I haven't bought a single one. Actually, I've bought one. So my GRC tool has released a new AI component. And this AI component is allowing me to be more effective in managing risk, governance, compliance, and all of the different business processes that I rolled into its automation platform. So I'm using the GRC tool we have has a business automation platform built into it, so I'm able to do a lot of things for the business. And using the AI that comes with it, this is a really important part to this. This isn't current state, this isn't version 1, this is version 2, but it will happen. I have a lot of junior people who have never run an audit before. And I need them to understand, this is the person doing the audit, how do I audit a firewall? And it would take a lot of education and training, weeks for them to understand, read books and all this kind of stuff. Or they can use the AI that's built into the system. They can prompt it and say, what are common questions I should ask the network administrator? What are the settings that I should look for based on my own standards, right? Based on the NIST standards that we have or the DISA STIGs that we have, so that they would understand better how to do that. So that's a great use for AI, separate from having something that's going to attack somebody or defense against the network. So I'm a curmudgeon, so I tend to not go after vendors who have tons of brand new, shiny AI stuff.
I knew this question was coming, so I have real alcohol here on the table. It's funny, we used to talk about encryption and all of these tools, but AI, we talk about as a thing, almost as if it's a living organism, and it's a very different approach than I think we've ever had to deal with before from a systems management perspective. And so my perspective is, how do you vet or implement that thing into whatever tool or system or process that you have? And because we are talking about this thing as an with almost a humanistic kind of quality to it, I look at it like you're hiring an FTE. But what position is it? Is it a low-level FTE, so you don't need to do as intensive due diligence? Are you hiring an executive FTE? Are you hiring a manager? And almost look at it like you're going through a human resources process of what are the requirements for the position, and who are the partners with you that are doing this interviewing to hire this position to do this task. And so I think it's just a very odd dynamic when you're looking to implement something into a system that has this humanistic quality, that if you don't take that into account, you're missing how that thing is eventually going to provide outputs or even actual decision making in your organization. And so I think that has to be a consideration. I approach it like interviewing and hiring for a position in the organization.
It's a tricky question. We have started as small as possible. We started our AI journey with, as a company, not just as a security team, to say, which tools are we going to approve, right? We can't just let everybody do everything. So kind of starting at the top, isolating the tool usage, putting policy around it, and then specifically kind of that last mile control. I think that's where we were the most nervous, right? What are people putting into the models? What are people getting out of the models? And so, we really found, in our particular case, we're kind of a remote first company, so we're not on the network all the time. We have employees all over the world. And so how do we really control it when it's already outside of our network? And so really that last mile control for us was kind of the biggest thing that we implemented with, an enterprise class browser, and being able to kind of control a little bit more at the browser level. Beyond that, our GRC team kind of uses it for contract analysis. I think that's just a huge time saver. It's not something that I don't think it's not maybe the best use of the tech per se, but it definitely saves us a lot of time. So that's where we focused.
We started out and we looked at a number of use cases. We had a team dedicated to it. And one of the first questions I asked, what data don't we want in this? And what data is the golden egg? I'm in logistics, so everything's about efficiency and safety. And I mean everything. So we start from the aspect of what data don't we want in there and what use cases are going to help us move things faster. Contracts is one of those. The other one is managing efficiency on the floor and automation on the floor. So in my area of responsibility, I have about 800 warehouses warehouses, data centers, you name it, and it's forward, reverse, all flavors of logistics. So I have a very diverse population of sites that I need to secure. On those sites, there's all kinds of automation, robots running around, parts pickers, you name it. And so we started with, this is the data that we don't want in there. Everything else is on the board. Let's start looking at automation. Where can it help us with automation? Contracts was one of them. Risk profiles was another one, building profiles. And you can do it in a variety of tools. And then also looking at Microsoft Copilot for a lot of the classifications and data classifications across the business, because you can set it up so that Copilot will automatically classify data as people are and putting it into the system, and it'll go through and scrape and doing. So we looked at all the ways we could get automation without populating more data, and all the places where we could save time with data that we weren't really too worried about being public knowledge. And contracts is one of those where he's right, it saves a lot of time for an entire team. If you have 20 or 30 people looking at them, it saves hours. And it actually has very surprisingly good results. Yeah. So we started with use cases in all the lines of business, including shipping and receiving, which is something we hadn't really considered up front. And then we started building a risk model around that, and then we built policy around that, and then we built procedures around that. And now we're in the process, we're on third iteration of policy documents, which literally I just reviewed this morning, and we're educating the business. And I can tell you that even the business doesn't know how to use or what to use AI for. So it's going to be several iterations of it before we get to a place where I think we're going to have a good risk model around it and then good governance. But you're right, we don't control any of it. So we're mindful of that, and we backward plan from that.
But you all made it a point that you have assessed what you're utilizing, you're managing what you know, and you're taking a look at these throughout your entire environment. And so my next question was going to be, are you implementing any AI-specific governance policies? And I paused for just a second because this question was actually asked earlier, and in the back of the room, everybody started laughing, and they're like, ha, 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 who has AI policies? So I ask, are you implementing any AI specific governance policies?
I answered a question from our CEO today about the lack of AI policy, and we are absolutely doing that now. So it's in process.
Okay. We 3 years ago, we started down the AI path as a company, and my legal department wrote the original policy using ChatGPT at the time, and they that has evolved into a governance framework. We have a regular meeting of it's business side as well as IT side. I'm the co-chair of that. My boss, the chief technology officer, is the chair of that committee, and we also have a formalized process whereby if people have the need for a new business case or use case either for a software, an AI technology, or for a need without a technology specified. There is a complete onboarding process for that goes through multiple levels of checks. So there are 6 people who review it independently in a row. It starts with the data organization, and it ends with the chief technology officer. I'm right in the middle. And if any one of them says no, then it goes away. It's not entertained any longer. Now, this is a process that is entirely voluntary. There is a policy that says you have to follow it, but if you have a P card, you can pay your way into new AI technology. So we have shadow AI, which is a huge concern for us from a risk perspective, from a privacy perspective especially. And so there's...
And an insurance perspective.
Insurance, and so there's a lot of holes in our existing process, which we are slowly trying to fill using, there's an annual training and you have to sign off that you've read the policy, but you don't actually have to do anything. You just put a tick in a box and you're done. So there are a lot of controls which are ineffective that we're trying to resolve on that, but we are definitely moving the right direction.
Yes.
I actually have a follow-up question. In your experience, this is for the panel, is it a dedicated AI policy that stands alone, or is it integrated into the privacy policy?
For us, there is a standalone policy. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were going to do something. So for us, we have a standalone policy. We also have a standalone AUP for AI. So that's, we started out with it integrated into our existing AUP, and then about a year or so ago, I introduced a specialized AUP that was focused specifically on the do's and don'ts for AI usage.
I'll definitely defer to you always because you have a much better mustache than I do. But some of it is, it's funny that some of the way that you try to approach this is psychological. So part of my approach is understanding that people don't want to do extra work. And so you kind of sneak it in there. At a high level, I've got it in the information technology and security policy. Everybody has to attest to it. But what does it really say? It says it's part of our vendor management process. Nobody wants to do that. And so then they have to go to the vendor manager. They're like, okay, well, that's not me. Let's go to the vendor management policy. You look at the vendor management policy and third-party risk management, and then it gets much more in-depth. And it talks about all the work that you need to do if you're going to review and onboard, and here's our program and process for onboarding a new vendor. They don't want to do that. So immediately, just by those couple little things, you've eliminated 80% of the people that even want to talk about it. And so you kind of drill it down from there. And even further, the way that it's explained in our organization, we've got a small organization, we're 35 FTEs, so we're not enterprise grade. So we have to have fewer policy sets all over the place, but have more consolidation and centralization. But when we talk about the third-party risk management stuff, that really gets down to adhering to regulatory items. And so when you start talking about things that are audit and regulatory related, then you remove another 15%. So you've only got 5% of the people even talking about this stuff in earnest. But I think it has to be layered in ways that people understand that it touches all of these things. It's not just one thing. We're talking about technology, we're talking about security, we're talking about human processes, we're talking about business processes, we're talking about relationships, and all of that is intertwined. And I think part of the way that I've tried to approach that is to make sure that all of these touch points make sure that people understand all of these things are at play. So we have to have a broader discussion to make sure that we're thinking about all of these things before we just react and plug something in.
We're already on, so we're on V3 of our standalone policy, but what we've figured out is, number one, we have a dedicated team that does nothing but vet AI and review architecture of AI, data security, et cetera. And we have ITSM process where if you're in the business and you want to look at AI, it goes into the ITSM process for this team to review, and they spit out on the other side, yes, you can use it, or no, that's mostly bad. As a part of that process, we figured out that we need to iterate every 6 months just on, like you said, on the policy, right? Because we're enterprise level and we span the globe, so we have to be mindful of the complexity it's going to add as much as we think it's going to help. So we have to think about what other tertiary risks are associated with this, not just to the business, but in the geographical area, because you have privacy laws in all these different countries, you have disclosure laws in all these different countries, and then third parties that may be plugged into it as well. So we have a very active iteration on it, mainly because we know as much as it's going to help, we can hurt ourselves very quickly if we're not paying attention. And then the other side of it is we realized when we started this, we didn't know what we didn't know. And we're constantly looking for things that we hadn't thought through, risks that we had and risk profiles that we hadn't assessed, and we add those to not just to the policy, but to the model on the ITSM side of the house as part of the KPIs that we're managing so that we can track, okay, this is a real risk, this isn't a risk, this is something we see on a regular basis. So, yeah.
So we had a virtual question come in while we were working through the panel answers, and Charles actually was asking, how are you dealing with the fact that almost every application is incorporating AI into their components? So how are you dealing with that as the applications that you guys are now using within your ecosystem?
We turn it off.
So you've turned off all applications.
Turn it
You're
off.
done.
Yeah,
Time to go home.
Full send. This is a gray area because you talked about shadow AI. This is one of those areas where, enterprise level, you could have, 50 or 60 different vendor-specific pieces of software operating throughout your business, and you may or may not know if there's a new feature that's been added, especially if it's cloud-based. You may not know if it's been added. So this is an area where I think we struggle like everybody else just to keep up with those changes. And in just one instance, in one site, we could have 17 or 18 different pieces of software, all unique, all proprietary, all could have AI. So we're just now starting to address this problem. And I'd love to say here's the magic, the magic bullet for it, but this is going to be an evolving issue because I see, even in the security business, I see a lot of the tooling go into AI consolidation, doing both remediation, identification, et cetera. So we're going to see this across the spectrum.
I would agree it's extremely complex. I think it has to begin with a risk-based approach. What's critical? What are the critical data systems that you have? Because your critical applications are the ones that you're going to want to be most sensitive with allowing potentially any of that in there. Some of the things are benign that, okay, Adobe's writing a summary for you. Is that as critical to me? So I think it has to be a risk-based approach, but we also have to be very careful what we say people can or cannot do in an organization because somebody picks up their phone and asks Siri something, and all of a sudden it's like you just violated the AI policy. So it becomes very complex, but I think that if you appropriately risk rate the data and the systems in terms of business criticality and data criticality, then I think that's the stuff that you focus more on and don't waste as much time, but just continue to educate your user base about not only what it is, but what it could potentially invite. That's basic user education from a security perspective. What I see AI from the most in my house are my two boys making pictures of each other that look funny, right? But it's still a use case. And what if you start taking that use case into the business and start getting into deepfake stuff? So I think it has to be a risk-based approach, and you focus your time and attention, but at the same time continue to educate.
Yeah, I agree with the risk-based approach. There's actually two legs to this problem. One is onboarding new systems, right? I think the bigger challenge in our organization is what about the software you're already using that has advanced and they've added AI so you don't have a chance to look at the terms and conditions or how they're using your data. It just shows up one day. And that's what we're struggling with, right? And so I think taking the risk-based approach, labeling your data, understanding what department in the company is using it and what are they using it for, has to be the approach. But I would definitely caution everyone to look at the systems that you already have in place. Do they have AI? Are they looking at adding AI? And honestly, having a really strong third-party vendor management program is going to be critical, I think, in that area.
So I was going to mention that we don't have one, but I've read about some enterprise browsers that would help us to plug that gap, because they would identify those new uses of AI and block those at the browser level. So that's one solution. I have proposed language to my legal folks. No decision has been made yet, but I'm trying to insert language in all of the current, all the future contracts that says if you add AI to any part of your program, you have to let us know before this happens, so that we have a chance to re-vet. Essentially, it's the way I've always done third-party risk management or supply chain risk management is if there is a change in scope for the service or the software, it has to be reevaluated. And that's kind of what I consider this as a change of scope. This still doesn't, that piece of it doesn't protect us from the credit card users who just get their own, but that maybe is where the enterprise browser comes in. But I think that the greatest challenge one of the things I'm hoping to accomplish with this language is to get an SBOM back, and so I can understand more about their AI, their approach to AI, their things that, what do they call AI, and how does that equate to the models that we're used to.
So it seemed, though, with the advancing motions, is you even have to have that inventory of the products that you're using across all departments of your area, and how they're using it. So how they're using the product and how they're also using the AI components. So that's even ground foundational level, is understanding what you're using and where it's being used and mapping it accordingly, because we want to make sure that you have that foundational level to even begin your third-party risk management strategy. So that leads us to the next part. Because of the attacks that have occurred over the past 24 months, let's just say, being third-party risk injections or primarily based with that, how are you looking at the controls and strategies to secure that within your ecosystem? And are you requiring, and James, you brought up a good point, you're requiring the transparency of those third parties moving forward. So how is this deploying even a deeper level, or is this truly still at kind of investigations on everybody's parts?
Are you talking about software supply chain attacks?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge risk whether you're talking about AI or not. Software supply chain is huge to the risk management organization for a company, because the disadvantages are so huge. We have a very standard approach to doing. The only exception, the only new thing, is this new AI that I'm trying to introduce, because I now have the power because I'm on the little committee. I think that I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but having the ability for a company to understand the software, the intricacies of the software that you're purchasing is very, very important.
Yeah, one of you mentioned requesting an SBOM, so within that ecosystem as well, and that knowledge.
Yeah, we do SBOMs all the time on the software side for when my software development team, getting different code from different vendors, we always require an SBOM there.
For those people that are listening virtually, can you describe what an SBOM is?
Sorry, it's a software, it's a supply, or a bill of materials is what the BOM part is. So the S is software bill of materials. Essentially, it says, for instance, if you're using some code that you've gotten, you went to some website and downloaded some code, I don't know what that code is that you're going to put into this application. I don't know where the code, who wrote the code. I don't know if it's using libraries that are vulnerable. And so in order to understand the entire life cycle of the code, what's inside of this, let's say you bought a DLL, or let's say you have something that you can't break apart and use your own internal security tools to evaluate, like a, anyway, so the SBOM is very important because it gives a history of what goes into this thing. It lets you understand the underlying code so that you can determine whether or not there are risks and vulnerabilities to your applications. That's what an SBOM, so they take the same concept of an SBOM, the software bomb, and apply it to AI. So it's an AI bomb, a bill of material for what is this AI product, what LLMs are used, and what frameworks were used, and what type of information was used to train the models. And that's information that helps you understand as a company how risky is this vendor's use of AI. And so that's just one component to help us. It's just an artifact that you add to your audit. Did that help?
I think so. So let's move on to the next portion of the conversation, and we're talking about regulatory and compliance landscapes across globally. And so one of the questions that came up was, how are evolving global security regulations, such as DORA or NIST 2 or SEC breach disclosure rules, impacting your approach to compliance and incident reporting?
So being in healthcare, we were already highly regulated. We have government contracts as well, so I feel like we were already bound by many of the reporting regulations that are coming out for the wider audience, say. So it hasn't really impacted anything directly. I think what it has done is it's given more, it's informing boards more that this is a requirement, and that if they don't take appropriate action, like we were talking about earlier, based on risk, that if we do have an issue, they're going to need to report it. And I think the fear of, or the public shaming, I think, which has actually gotten a lot less with breaches, but I think that just the exposure there, I think, is enough to heighten their senses, and it really helps the cause. So I think the push for transparency, I think, is helping really with our overall mission and messaging. So I appreciate the transparency. I think, from my perspective, I think the more transparency that the industry has, I think the better off we are.
It's so we have regulated environments in our let's just say in our ecosystem. We have FISMA high, FISMA moderate, you name it. So we were already gearing up to move towards that. But one of the shifts that we've seen, especially in the last year, again, third-party logistics, so we're vendors for a lot of companies. And where we're seeing this show up is not just in our risk model, but we're seeing more audit language in contracts from our customers. We're seeing more privacy language that's tailored towards specific countries because of legislation. But more importantly, we're seeing a lot more reporting language in the contracts and the renewals, because the reporting requirements by country have changed, some of them exponentially. And it depends on which country you're in. Case in point, there was one of our third parties was breached just after we closed a contract with them, and the reporting requirements, the breach happened in June. We're still working the reporting requirements for the country, for the affected country, and it's been several months, and several lawyers, et cetera. So we're seeing it show up in both contracts. We're seeing it show up in audits and audit language, and we're also seeing it show up in the privacy language too. So what I anticipate is, as countries get more specific and more detailed about privacy language, outside of GDPR, right? Like NIST is NIST. You can get buried in the details in NIST, but what NIST 2.0 does, it rolls everything up to more of a macro level, so you're not focused on the details like 853, 63, 171, et cetera. So we're seeing more alignment towards one specific model, in this case NIST, because it gives us a framework that covers a lot of spectrums at a security level. But what we're not getting away from is the audit language, right? We have, last year, I think we dealt with maybe 2 or 3 big customer audits. This year, we're at 10 and counting.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of it's because of the fact that there's been all these attacks on the logistics and supply chain over the past year. So, and the language has changed in a lot of these countries. So a lot of our customers are hedging their bet with all of their vendors and forcing all their vendors to do not to say, okay, are you really doing this, or is this vaporware? And I think we're going to see more stringent audit profiles for companies, especially for vendors and third-party vendor management, just because of liability and indemnity. So, right? So the other side, the other aspect of this is the insurance companies have changed too. So we're seeing less of a focus on building these big security monolithic teams to do threat hunt and all those other things, and more of a focus on how do we manage the insurance and the audit and the compliance side, because it's getting more arduous versus less, even with automation. That was a long answer for a very short question.
I'll just answer that very briefly as I can. I work for a bank, so we're slightly regulated.
A little bit.
And I think there's some tea leaf reading that has to go on here, because even we asked our federal regulators about AI, and they're like, we haven't quite figured out how we're going to deal with that yet. So what are they focusing on? Because I think that's the path to where it's going, that you're reading the tea leaves on. And it's things like looking at stuff that's going on in the privacy space. Like what you said, it's change management. It's change management, project management. It's those kinds of things that they're paying more attention to, because they understand those are the undergirdings to trying to wrap their heads around how to regulate this space.
I just sell burritos. We have PCI DSS. That's food safety, but not highly regulated and not publicly traded.
So we did have one question come in, and I think we'll approach that at the end, if that's okay, because I wanted to look at the next couple of minutes of looking ahead 3 to 5 years. What emerging threats or paradigm shifts do you think will reshape cybersecurity, and how should leaders like yourself start to prepare now?
I watched this movie in the 80s called Terminator. The Skynet's not quite here yet. I mean, honestly, the thing that kind of scares me the most from a cybersecurity attack perspective, and we're seeing this bleeding in modern warfare, is drone technology and the notion of EMP attack. Those are the things that, okay, what's coming next? And we're seeing these little mini swarms happen in places, but how do you protect your critical infrastructure? I say that knowing that she talks about critical infrastructure. I'm a member of InfraGard too, bonus point. But how do you protect your critical infrastructure, not just your business, because it's all the critical infrastructure that's going to allow your business to have power, to have energy. And if we're talking about the AI farms and the energy that they're going to need to actually run this stuff, that's a huge absorption. So drone stuff, EMP stuff that's going to attack the energy that we need to run everything, that's my biggest concern.
Boy, there's a lot there to unpack. We could go right down the rabbit hole. What I see, and I'll just stick with the cyber realm, because we could talk current events, we could talk China, we could go into all the tech that's out there. From a cyber perspective, I see AI being a big threat across the landscape for a lot of reasons. One, AI is going to be on your phone now, so the access that an individual has to be able to move data out of your perimeter without you even knowing about it and setting up shadow information It's going to be, I think, even more prevalent because these are getting more powerful and not less. The other thing that I see is virtualization is going to be a lot different. We're going to see AI take over a lot of roles right now that are run by humans. So we probably won't have the span of control that we have now to be able to restrict access and limit access and prevent access. We're going to hand that over to AI, and that has a whole host of issues that go along with it. And then there's the piece around AI creating information and presenting information that can either influence or change your business without you even realizing it until it's already done. I don't know if you're Joe Rogan fans, but I watched I think it was last week, I watched Elon Musk talking about AI will control the cell networks and present you with data on your phone that will be tailored specifically to what it thinks you want to see. Now, move that to business and imagine what that's going to look like in business. Mm-hmm. How much information and span of control is AI going to have in business? And granted, right now it's a shiny object, but let's face it, it's being incorporated into almost every aspect of business right now, and really no guardrails around it. So I see that as an emerging threat. The kinetic stuff, done that, been there. I know what that looks like. When things go boom in the night, things stop working. So that's a different problem set to solve. Where I see AI becoming more dominant is not just in that aspect, but it's in the personal aspect too. And you're going to see employees change too, and the employee landscape change. Mm-hmm. I think we'll see more remote work, more remote employees with more third parties in the cloud, et cetera, more integrations with other companies where there's susceptibility there. And that can lead to denial of service. I don't know if everybody knew that Google lost a fiber line, I think it was 2 months ago, and literally took down, 10 different services like that. That's what I see emerging as those kind of attacks. I don't see, EMP is a whole different problem. If that happens, I'm just going to smoke them while I got them. But the other piece I see too is with current global events, the current move to BRICS, and with the currencies, and you're the bank guy, you can talk this better than I can. I see there's going to be a lot of banking system moves and consolidation with, stable coins if they bring those around, and a lot of information that's centralized into the banking system that right now is controlled by 5 or 6 different companies, and susceptibilities there that can stop companies from moving and pivoting and, daily operations. It can impact operations, best way to say it.
So that before this current generation of AI, all this excitement, there was like machine learning and stuff like that. So AI has been around for a while. So I'm not talking about the entire life cycle of AI, but starting with when ChatGPT first opened its doors and everybody got all excited. That's only been 3 years, and look at how much has progressed. I mean, it used to be Will Smith eating concrete pieces, right? You guys have seen those videos, and now they can create videos that are so realistic. What are they going to be able to do in 5 years, right? So I truly believe that as the bad guys in the world start to get better and better, and AI progresses in being better able to simulate real things. I mean, you guys mentioned Skynet. I'm thinking Matrix type of stuff here, but not in 5 years, right? And actually, I guess the one thing that keeps me more optimistic, you guys have seen those android robots from China or Japan or something, remarkable things, very dexterous. And then this last weekend, I think India rolled out one that fell on its face, right, crashed immediately. So it's more difficult than you think. And so that kind of keeps me optimistic that it's a harder nut than people expect. And 5 years is a relatively short amount of time. Now, everything these guys have said, I understand and agree with completely, and I share those same concerns. Not so much the EMPs, I've never really studied that, but all the other stuff, absolutely. But I'm kind of two minds from AI. I am a curmudgeon, and I said don't use it because it's awful, but I also see the good parts to it. So it's not as much a threat to me, but it is a threat.
I wish I could predict the future. I'd be a very rich man. I tend to agree. I mean, what these guys said is absolutely true. I believe AI is a game changer. I tend to think it's going to go back to physical attacks. I think as our dependency increases on technology, at the end of the day, if you can unplug it and they can't use it. So what I mean by that is we've talked a lot today about all these different ways we can integrate AI into our defenses and all these different systems, and we had a whole room of vendors over there with a bunch of tech. But what happens when we don't have power? All of those defenses go away. So I think quantum computing is going to be important for encryption, and I honestly think physical attacks are going to be more prominent. I think if you can disrupt, you can cripple businesses or critical infrastructure, the power grid. I think those are the bigger risk in the future. All that's to say, I can't predict the future, but if I had to guess, I think that's where I would go.
Well, let's build on that, protecting the critical infrastructure. Plug for InfraGard. Have to do my due diligence here. That's our goal, is to protect the critical infrastructure. And so by doing that, by increasing the thought leadership, the threat intelligence feeds, the combination of the physical and security of cyber and agriculture and biometrics and all of those security features that InfraGard is looking at, I think it's a great way for us to build on top of each other and start to predict the future just a little bit and protect, not only predict, but protect. So thank you, gentlemen. We did have that one call come in, or question come in from the virtual. Can you bring that back up? Thanks. And then real quick, AI is being a part of the DNA of applications and operating systems. What is your advice for organizations to prevent shadow AI and INSA from exploiting AI against the organization?
It's a really good question. I touched on it earlier. I think, the best thing that I could find was an enterprise level browser. So you have that control at the browser level. I don't think there's a way to completely prevent it, but that's where I'm putting all my eggs in the browser control.
I would agree. Of all the tech that I've seen to address AI, that is probably the one that has the best efficacy. And if there's other choices, I'm sure, but that's what I've seen.
We're talking about how do you deal with people, right? Mm-hmm. Good parenting. And I mean, that extends from the home to the business. There's a concept here
In school.
about teaching, investing time, paying attention, building relationship. I heard 3 very important C's from the lunchtime seminar, and it's children and community and culture. And we have to remember we're a human race here, and we have to bond together in a way that reminds each other that we are more important than technology. And if we have good parenting, good stewardship for all the people that we interact with, then you have a culture that is invested in doing things the right way, as opposed to in insidious, shadowy kinds of ways.
What he said. Only I will say, part of 90% of a CISO's job, and you guys can feel free to disagree with me, 90% of my job in my last 4 CISO roles was mentoring. Mentoring the company, mentoring the board, mentoring the tech teams, mentoring the executive team, and really a lot of it is educating the business on and building good security hygiene through culture. And culture is probably the most important thing. You're never going to, the larger the organization, the more operational debt, the more shadow IT, and the more shadow AI you're going to have. It's a fact of life. You can't get rid of all of it. You can't block it all, but you can educate people to think about it with a security-first mindset. That really does work, and it really does work if you invest the time and the relationships within the business so your peers, number one, trust you and know that you're going to actively listen to them when they talk to you. That helps them evangelize what you want them to evangelize across the business, and it really gives them an advocate to go back and say, yeah, this is what he's talking about. And it really pays to have good street cred with your organization, because not only will they listen to you and respect you, but they're going to, over time, you got to beat the drum on it, but over time, you're really doing an influencing operation on the business to get the business to adopt all these things as the first thought, not the second, right? And the hard part for a CISO is typically you're the last part of the executive team that's hired, right? So you got to come in, build a security program, gain street cred, build trust, get the business to listen to you, go fight for budget, go fight for people, get the right balance without breaking velocity, without breaking any of the throughput, et cetera. So it's a balance act, but mentoring and credibility go a long ways.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for participating today. You guys made some very good points about the culture and the community. So we as organizations come together to build that culture of cybersecurity and build our community and recognize that FutureCon allows us to do this. So Kim, thank you for providing this opportunity for us to come together, to continue to build our people, our community, but most importantly, the cybersecurity culture across not only Arizona, but the nation. So thank you. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for our virtual audience. And Kim, I now pass the mic to you for the raffle prizes. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you all very much. And that'll all be like recorded. If you guys need a copy or anything, just let us know. That'd be great. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Okay. Let's get the rest of this party started here. We have lots of prizes, and let's hope that we have enough people for the prizes. All right. I am going to start with Abnormal is giving away a